from Holliston. How many of you are from Holliston? Could you just stand?
Everybody else.
Okay. And how many of you, you can sit down, how many of you are from neighboring communities?
The rest. Get to across the
Thank you.
That's elimination.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Right. Check your IDs, your license.
Thank the Democratic Town Committee for organizing this, especially our chair, Beth Greeley, and Diana Vosberg. I'd like to also acknowledge at least one official. As I said, it's hard with the spotlight in my eyes to spot everybody, so if I don't recognize you, I apologize. But we do have our own state representative, Carolyn Dykeman, here with us. Carolyn, do you want to stand? Thank you for coming, and I believe we're expecting Senator Karen Stilzo, who represents the town of Holliston in the state senate, to come a little later. If Karen's here, please let me know now. Okay. I'd also like to acknowledge Holliston Cable Access, who's in the back of the room, and they will be taking the show to be aired several times in the next 2 to 3 weeks on Channel 8 in Holliston. The format for this evening is to provide each panelist a chance to talk about their area of expertise for about 5 minutes, followed by an hour of questions from the audience, because we want to hear from you. But I would emphasize that they are questions. I don't want people coming up to the mic and making statements, just questions. We want you to be active participants tonight, not just passive listeners. Microphones have been provided in the front of the auditorium at the end of the aisles for this purpose. You should identify when you do get up for questions, your name and where you are from. You should direct your questions to one particular panelist, but the others will, in some cases, have a chance to jump into the conversation. We'll have a brief wrap-up with the panelists at the end of the evening. Let's talk guns, because we have to. Tragedy isn't one school shooting, horrific as it was. It's the unceasing toll of homicides and suicides every day across our country. Guns are one of the most polarizing issues in American politics. Americans themselves are very conflicted about guns, and often very passionate on both sides of the debate. Suffice it to say, this is a very difficult topic, and people have strong opinions. But tonight we will be civil, and we will be respectful of each other, regardless of our stance. Now I'd like to briefly introduce our panelists. The mix-up is, they're not sitting exactly where I had hoped, so we'll just wing this. Way down at the end, to my right, is our very own Chief John Moore, Chief of Police, who graduated from Suffolk Law School in 1988 and practiced law until 1995, when he changed career directions and became a patrolman for the Holliston Police Department. He became Chief of Police in 2011, a Holliston native. He grew up in the Mudville section of Holliston. His mother taught at the Adams Middle School, and his father worked for the Holliston Police Department. Margaret Fitzpatrick has been Director of Holliston Youth and Family Services for the past 11 years and is a licensed independent clinical social worker. Her department provides clinical services to the residents of Holliston, including partnering with schools to identify at-risk youth and develops plans of intervention to help. An old friend and a member of the House of Representatives, way down here to my left, since 1999, Representative David Linsky currently serves as the chair of the House Committee on Post-Audit and Oversight. David represents the 5th Middlesex District of the State House, comprised of the towns of Natick, Sherburne, and 2 precincts in Millis. Jim Wallace, sitting next to me here, and he has served as the executive director and a lobbyist for GOAL since 2005. GOAL stands for Gun Owners Action League, the official state organization of the National Rifle Association. A U.S. Army veteran and avid sportsman, Jim advocates on Second Amendment issues and is a frequent guest on local and national media. He has worked to influence Massachusetts gun laws and authored state legislation to protect gun owners. And Jerry Belair is here, and he is General Counsel for Meredith Management, a Massachusetts real estate development company. Jerry is a founding board member and the legislative director of Stop Handgun Violence, the organization responsible for the large billboard bordering the Massachusetts Turnpike that cites gun-related statistics. Jerry was brought up in New Hampshire where he hunted extensively, and he is a lifelong gun owner. That is our panel. We are delighted to have them, and I'd like to have Chief Moore begin, if he would.
Thank you and good evening. Can everybody hear me on this?
Yes.
First off, I'd like to thank the Holliston Democratic Party for sponsoring this event. I'd like to thank Barbara Gardner, someone I've known for many years, for being the moderator. And I'd also like to thank my fellow panelists for being here with me tonight. There's quite a variety of both information and viewpoints that will be presented to you, and I'm sure you won't be disappointed. To start off, the gun control or gun rights debate has been going on for quite some time. Unfortunately, events such as the Sandy Hook school shooting has been a catalyst to bring this to the forefront, and it's probably one of the main reasons why we're having these forums both in Holliston and in other towns. I've been asked to speak tonight from basically an educational perspective about gun licensing, safe storage of guns, school safety, and violence prevention. Tonight I speak to you with no political agenda. I'm here to be as informative as I can be to you in the next 2 hours and thereafter about any questions or concerns you might have. And that is extended to our whole department. We have two very fine firearms licensing officers in our town, Officer Scanlon and Officer McCrae. And if you do live in the town, or even if you don't, and you have any questions in the future, you can ask them. In terms of gun licensing in Massachusetts, for those who aren't too familiar with it, it's a very closely monitored administrative system of laws and regulations. Licensing, registration, purchasing, selling, and the enforcement of gun laws in the state is among the most rigorous in the nation. Licensing involves a comprehensive system of background checks and a discretionary suitability factor in which to grant a license to carry, applicants have to go past statutory qualifications, and they also have to be found. That makes Massachusetts one of the 8 strictest states in the country in terms of gun licensing. In Massachusetts, when we talk about gun safety and proper storage of guns, Massachusetts goes quite a long ways in that regard. To get a license to carry, someone has to take a firearm safety course. If someone buys a firearm, in all likelihood they'll be given a trigger lock, and they'll be given information in terms of how to secure a gun properly in their house. We'll talk a little further, and I'm sure questions will bring this out. What is the proper way to carry, transport, or store a firearm? Typically, it has to be under your direct control, or it has to be secure. In terms of school safety measures, since Columbine in 1999, school safety measures have been greatly promoted, practiced, and prepared by school departments, police departments, fire departments, and other social services. Since Sandy Hook in 2012, those practices that were in place have been enhanced and have been reviewed. But one of the things I'd like to point out, try to prevent it before it happens. You can't be reactionary. You have to mitigate any threats that might be out there before they actually become violence. So you have to prepare for it. And we as a police department do that. And we do that in conjunction with the schools and with social services in town. And we're ready for it. And if we have to respond, we will. And if there is a violent event, whether it be at a school or someplace else, and whether it involves a gun or some other deadly weapon, we're prepared for it. And we'd aid in the recovery process as well. So I stand ready for any questions that you might have, and I'll pass it on to the next panelist.
Thank you very much, Chief Morgan.
Hello. I am in the unique position to be the only person on the panel that isn't going to talk about guns. As the Director of Youth and Family Services, we provide mental health services to all the residents of Holliston. One of the programs that we feel very strongly about, and we've been employing for 9 years now, is the team approach to identifying at-risk youth in the town. Because one of the things that I think that has become quite clear as a result of the school shootings is the idea that if we are able to identify at-risk kids early enough, that we might be able to prevent some of these awful tragedies that have happened. I'm proud to say that in our town, we have the approach to this in order to capture at-risk youth in the way that I think it should be done everywhere. We are a small town, and so we are able to work as a team in a way that Youth and Family Services, I go into the schools, we work with, the schools welcome us in, we have ways of identifying through teachers, through guidance people, kids that maybe are starting to fall off the radar and might be, that there's a change in behavior and become problematic, and that we're able to step in and do an intervention at that point and provide family work. We work with the police. We have a court diversion program that we partner with the police on, which, first time minor offense, kids come to our program and we work with them for 6 months as opposed to them having to go to court. And because we work all of these different departments together, and because we're the size that we are, we're able to get to know the kids and the other members of the community in a way that I think in larger places is probably a little more difficult. And because I live in this community and I work in this community, and I've been doing this job, as Barbara had mentioned, for I think it's 11 or 12 years now. And so you become and you know the community, and as such, you wrap the services around, and you're able to intervene from all different departments in order to hopefully prevent and give kids the support that they need, so that perhaps we can prevent, tragedies from happening, in our town and other places. So thank you.
Okay, next is Representative Legislation.
Thank you very much, Barbara, and I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. I'm hoping that we can have a good, civil, constructive conversation about some of these issues. I want to thank the Holliston Democratic Town Committee and the Amherst Middle School for hosting us tonight. And it's good to see so many people here. Why are we here? Let me put it this way. We have a problem in this country, in my view. And we have a problem that is unmatched of any other country in the entire world. By far, the United States of America has more deaths due to gun violence than any other country in the world. We have
We're not going to have that. We're not going to interrupt the panelists.
He's got to tell the truth.
You
You're not open to thoughts.
You must
You're not
listen to
open
him
to thoughts.
respectfully. You can ask him questions later, but right now he is going to talk and you are not.
Like it or not, 32,000 people die every single year in the United States of America due to different forms of gun violence. Between 11,000 and 12,000 of those are homicides. The majority of them are either accidental shootings or suicide. Usually about 16,000, 17,000 a year are suicides. It adds up to 32,000 deaths a year. I want to put that into perspective. On September 11, 2001, 3,000 people tragically died as the result of the terrorist attacks on 9/11. Horrible, horrible incident. As a result of that, we entered into two separate wars, one in Iraq, one in Afghanistan. Thousands more have died. That was due to the deaths of 3,000 people. We have the equivalent number of deaths due to firearms every 5 weeks in this country. Since September 11, 2001, we have lost nearly 400,000 people due to firearm deaths in this country. That is nothing to laugh about. That is nothing to be happy about. We as a civil society should be ashamed that that is what we lead this world with, firearm deaths. So that's why we are here. It's a serious matter. Are they all the same? Can we prevent all of them? No, we can't. What we have to recognize is that there are different reasons that this happens. As I said, most of them are suicides. Let me talk a little bit about suicide.
People are gonna die anyways.
It rips a family apart. It rips a community apart. And the reality is that most suicides are preventable. If you attempt suicide with a handgun, you are successful, and I'll put that in quotes right now, in killing yourself about 90% of the time. If you attempt suicide by any other means, you complete the act of suicide about 35% of the time. When people are interviewed after a suicide attempt, the vast majority are happy that they survived. Those are deaths, and they are firearm deaths, and many of them are preventable. Similarly, a lot of firearm deaths are accidents. Those are all preventable. We cannot solve all the different types of firearm violence completely, but we can start to cut it down, and that, in my view, would be making progress. So that what I have done as a result of that, and I'm not a newcomer to this by any means, I want you to know a little bit about my background. I've worked on this issue for over 30 years, since I was a freshman in college. And following college, I went to law school, and then I was an assistant district attorney in Middlesex County for 14 years. And I prosecuted 25 homicide cases and investigated a lot more. And I've had the experience of literally standing over a dead body where one person has shot another. And I've also had the experience of standing over dead bodies where people have shot themselves, and the experience of standing over dead bodies where they've been accidentally shot. That's not a pleasant experience, and it's something that I've had to do professionally. And let me tell you, there's nothing worse than having to go to a family and tell them about how their family member or their loved one died. And so we as a society, whether or not you agree with me or not, should be able to agree on one thing, that we have too many firearm deaths in this country, and that we need to figure out some way to cut it down. So that what I've done as a result of that is that I've sponsored legislation, and this is not the first time.
Ms. Moderator, it's 5 minutes, you said, ma'am, for the introduction?
I have a timekeeper, thank you.
Thanks, ma'am.
Please. All right, thank you very much. So that my legislation, I'll be happy to talk about it later, is aimed at trying to identify the different types of firearm violence, and each one of the 25 or so different provisions in it is designed to cut down on certain aspects of it. Some go to accidental shooting, some go to suicide, some go to mass shooting, some go to domestic violence, some go to gang violence. There are provisions in there actually increase penalties for certain types of firearm crimes. Using a firearm while committing an assault, increase the penalty. Thank you very much, I'm happy to talk about it.
And now, our next speaker is Jim Wallace.
Good evening, everybody. How are we doing? I'm a little shy, so if you can't hear me, just let me know. And also, just so the room knows, I am the evil gun lobbyist in the room. So, you know, recently we have certainly been under attack for a long time, but you know, let me just give you a little history if you don't know about Massachusetts. In 1998, the Massachusetts legislature passed the Gun Control Act, quite a comprehensive piece of legislation, and it actually turns out to be one of the most convoluted, complex set of laws in the country. There's literally a 400-page book that is published by a retired police chief on how to begin to understand the Massachusetts gun laws. Any citizen that needs a 400-page book to begin to explain to them what is expected of them as a citizen just simply needs to be thrown in the trash and started again. But let's look at the results. In 1998, we had 1.5 million licensed gun owners in the state of Massachusetts. Now in 2002, the House Post Audit and Oversight Committee under Jim Fagan actually did a study because they were finding people in the field, whether they were out hunting or trying to buy ammunition, that didn't have a current license. They found that even as early as 2002, that the number of licensed gun owners had been decreased from 1.5 million down to 250,000, an 85% reduction. Just last week, gun owners actually released a report using all of the information from the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, because they track gun-related injuries in Massachusetts, and they've been doing so since 1994. From 1994 to 1997, gun-related injuries, assaults, and homicides dropped drastically. But since the passage of the 1998 Gun Control Act, in every single category, gun-related injuries related to assaults and homicides have increased dramatically. Homicides with firearms have doubled since 1998. Assaults with firearms have tripled since 1998. And I suppose you could look at accidental deaths and say it's success because it's been dropped by 50%, but that's only because in 1998 there were 2 and 2011 there was 1. So if you want to count that as a 50% drop, I guess you could. One of the other statistics that's very interesting that I wasn't prepared for was that the FBI, through their violent crime reports, actually show that Massachusetts, if you compare per 100,000 violent crime rate, is the highest state in the Northeast, including New York and New Jersey, which really surprised me. So basically, what happened in 1998 was a whole set of laws that were passed that virtually no one can understand. I've been doing this professionally since 2000, and I still have to look up laws when people call me and ask me for advice. And gun crime has increased drastically. So something obviously went wrong. And it's not like we have just a year or two of evidence. This is almost 15 years now of evidence that the Department of Public Health has gathered and has proven that simply gun control doesn't work in Massachusetts. Now, we can blame our neighbors to the north and we can blame our neighbors to the south, but the bottom line is, when you compare Massachusetts to Massachusetts, gun crime has gone through the roof. So now what do we do about that? Gun owners actually has been working now for several years to reform the gun laws we have now to make them, number one, understandable, and number two, effective, while respecting the civil rights of lawful citizens. And unfortunately, most of the gun laws that we have focus on the lawful citizen rather than the actual criminal. As a matter of fact, you can read the police blotters all day long, all across the state, and the first thing that's usually dropped in a case is the gun charge, and then they move on from there. The problem is right now, as a matter of fact, in Massachusetts, if you're a lawful gun owner, trying to actually maintain your lawful status as a gun owner by renewing your license, rather than the law, which says it's supposed to be renewed in 40 days, is taking now upwards of 4 to 8 months to renew your license. And there's virtually no one in charge of this administration. I actually met with the new Secretary of Public Safety just 2 weeks ago, Andre Cabral, and was talking to her about this. And even though it's a state-mandated license, It's a state-produced license. The state produces the statutes which show who can and can't have a license. They actually have no authority over the issuing people, which are at the local level. So if you have an issue with renewing your license, it's the only state agency where there's no one to go to complain. There's virtually no one in charge of the overall system. So Gun Owners Action League is going to be working very hard in the next couple of years, and hopefully in this session, number one, to bring the laws under control, to respect the civil rights of lawful citizens. But number two, we need to start getting tough on the people who are causing these crimes. If there's anybody in this room that isn't angry about what happened in Connecticut, I'd like to talk to you later, and I'm sure there's a young lady down the table here that would like to talk to you, but we lost 20 babies. We lost 6 brave adults. Should never have happened. You know, the chief may argue with me a little bit, but a can of pepper spray in that front office would have changed everything. But we can't have pepper spray in schools because it's considered ammunition. But I'll be glad to take any questions later as we move along.
Let's hold the applause. We're not applauding for everyone, so let's just hold it.
Everybody gets in there.
That's it.
Now let's hear from the youngster boy.
You're gonna applaud for me, right? I always like to get it first because I don't get it after. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I've been at this for 2 decades now. I'm a gun owner, lifetime gun owner. I was taught to shoot a gun when I was 5 years old. I hunted extensively in New Hampshire. I hunted in Quebec. I hunted duck. I hunted whitetail. I hunted bear. I know my way around a gun. I became convinced that when 15 kids a day were dying from handguns, and when 32,000 people a year were dying from handguns, that it wasn't really necessary. And something could be done without taking away anybody's right to have a gun. I still firmly believe that. I believe in the Second Amendment, and I believe in common sense gun laws that keep people from getting killed. Sandy Hook should really drive that message home to a lot of people. I want to talk about my 20 years in being an advocate for gun safety. Starting in 1993 when the Brady Bill was passed and we first got universal background checks that the NRA supported. Except that they also supported a collector's exemption. They made sure that a collector's exemption got into the universal background check bill. What that collector's exemption was for a collector who had 1 or 2 guns, who might want to sell it to a friend or a family member and not have to do a background check. And that made sense at the time. But the collector's exemption is not that anymore. It's evolved. It's evolved to 40% of gun sales in this country being conducted without the benefit of a background check. That's 6.5 million guns a year that are being purchased without a background check. What are people in the NRA, what is the leadership afraid of to say that we should not have a background check? Why would a criminal not go to a gun show and buy a gun, or send a friend to buy 5 guns, or buy 6 or 7 guns himself and sell 4 or 5 to a friend so that he could get his for free? It doesn't make any sense to me. And it doesn't make any sense to 92% of Americans who believe that a background check should be conducted for every single gun sale in this country. A majority of NRA members believe that every single gun sale should have a background check. It's only the leadership of the NRA that doesn't believe in that. The leadership of the NRA, also in 1993, attacked the CDC because the CDC conducted a study and said that if you have a gun in your house, you're 3 times more likely to have a family member shoot a family member. And it's very unusual for you to use that gun in self-defense. Now, that was a scientific study, and it was certain results. But the NRA was livid. They didn't like the fact somebody was doing a scientific study in the government and coming out with those kinds of results that they didn't agree with. So what did they do? They made sure that that $2.6 million that was spent by the CDC for that study was taken out of their budget. In 2006, it was restored, but then they entered language into the CDC's budget that said, the CDC will not be allowed to use any money for injury prevention in advocating or promoting gun control. So in other words, you can't do any research to find out what it is that's causing deaths from gun violence. You laugh, but that's exactly what happened. And that's exactly what happened. Gun violence kills it. You know what? If 32,000 people a year in this country died from hamburgers, what do you think the CDC would be doing? Congress would be having hearings.
Shutting down the illegal hamburger maker.
You recently had congressional hearings because a few hundred people died from an injection made from compounding in Massachusetts. Can you imagine? The CDC cannot investigate the causes of gun violence in this country because the NRA is going to go livid.
Center for Disease Control. Disease Control.
Gun violence is killing people. Accidents, car accidents is killing people. They're not diseases. The CDC studies them. Now, all right.
Let him finish, please.
All right, so they've done away with funding, they've done away with background checks for 40% of gun sales, and then they went after the ATF&E. The ATF&E, which the NRA, famously called jackbooted stuff. The NRA succeeded in requiring that all evidence from background checks done by the ATF&E would have to be destroyed within 24 hours, thereby assuring that the ATF&E couldn't find where the gun originally came from in the event that they found it in a crime situation. When evidence was uncovered that showed 57% of crime guns were traced to 1% of gun owners, the ATF&E did what they were supposed to do. They initiated some investigation. Well, the NRA got Congress to pass legislation to disallow ATF&E from visiting a gun store more than one time per year. The ATF&E is not allowed to visit a gun store more than once a year. The ATF&E is not allowed to require a gun dealer to inventory his stock. You're not running this meeting.
I know.
All right.
I'm running it, please be quiet.
How
You
come
don't
you
like
shut down
what you
Wallace
hear,
about the other guys?
you can challenge it later. But I get the right, I have the right, I'm up here, I have the right to say what I want to say.
Follow your own rules.
All right, I guess.
So, I'm going, I'm gonna quit the authority and continue here.
No. You have opportunities for you to say more than what you already had. I would give him another minute just because of the interruptions.
All right, I want to say what else has happened to the ATF&E because of the NRA. Through their go-to guy, under the, Todd Tier in Kansas, the NRA sponsored legislation that they attached to bills that would not allow the ATF&E to share crime data information from crime guns that it got in crime with law enforcement officials or with the public. They denied the ATF&E from sharing information of crime guns with law enforcement and with the public. And then finally, let me guess. They caused the agency to be underfunded, funded to the tune of a decade ago, basically. And in their funding, there were 11 lines that contained information on funded, and and there were 76 lines of prescriptions of their powers. For example, when the ATF&E said that they wouldn't allow the import of large capacity shotguns because they had no legitimate hunting purpose, there was a line actually put in their budget to overturn that rule. And there were 75 additional lines to stop the ATF&E from doing the job that it was supposed to be doing.
But then they can ship them to Mexico.
I would now like to recognize, I think, our state senator is here, Karen Spilka, and I know she wanted an opportunity to address the audience, to talk about a piece of legislation she has. I believe it's related to mental health. So Karen, welcome. We mentioned you earlier, but you weren't here, so we're glad that you came, and we'll give you a few minutes to talk about your bill.
Thank you. And I want to thank, is this on?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Can people hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I want to thank the folks that organized this. There may be a lot of disagreement, but that's what's healthy. I think that we need to debate and discuss these issues. So I want to thank all of the panelists for being here, and I will include these thank yous in part of my 2 minutes. I just want to, I have been focusing for the last 7 or 8 years on providing better mental health services to children and families. I think that this is something that we as a state really need to be focusing on, that the sooner we can get mental health services to children and families, because a lot of what the children experience are symptoms of what the families, the parents are going through. So last year, and I'm saying this because I think all of you can help with this, last year, the last bill that we passed in the legislature was a bill that I had been working on for literally 7 years, 7, 8 years, called CHINS Reform, Children in Need of Services. It created family resource centers across the state, so children and families will eventually be able to access the mental health services, the substance abuse services, to get them the services a lot sooner in their community without having to go to court, without entering the criminal justice system. This is what I heard for many years that would help give families and children the services and prevent them from hopefully later on down the road having instances like the tragedies at either Newtown or Aurora or across the country that we hear. I'm asking all of you that when we passed the bill, we had a 3-year implementation phase in. I've been involved in meetings in the implementation, but I think that the tragedies have created even more of a sense of urgency to provide these services to our children and families. So I ask if you would like to do something when you leave here, call the administration, call your state rep and your senator, and ask them to implement this reform. It's called the FACES bill, which stands for Families and Children Engaged in Services. It really destigmatizes the need for children to get these services and yet provides them, and we're hoping to do this in a little bit more of an expedited fashion. So that's what I ask. I wanted to at least inform you that we are taking steps on that end to help our children and families. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Karen. And now we've come to the portion where we will hear from our audience with questions. Again, questions, not statements. I think it's fair to say, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that there are a lot of gun owners in the audience, and there are some people who have an opposing point of view. So occasionally, I am going to ask for people to come forward who might not feel comfortable doing that, to ask if they have a dissenting opinion. But right now, we're going to have questions. I would like them directed at one particular panelist, if I could. And can you please come up, identify yourself, where you're from, and ask your question to one of the microphones in the front of the other side. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Meeting's over. They're not sitting down.
We have another microphone over on this side, Beth in the green shirt. You can line up behind her with your questions if you'd like. Okay, this first gentleman in the hat.
Yes, my name is Brian Doe. I'm a law enforcement professional here in Massachusetts, and my question is for Chief John Moore. Being a fellow law enforcement professional, I swore an oath to the Constitution of the United States, and I also swore an oath to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Constitution, which both in Article 17 and the Second Amendment specifically states that the Second Amendment shall not be infringed. And as a law enforcement professional, I'd like to know, from your perspective, if Representative Linsky's bill is passed, in regards to having a quote-unquote assault weapons ban, and also, in regards to insurance.
Where's the question?
I'm getting to
Okay.
it. As a law enforcement professional that swore an oath to the United States Constitution, not to politicians, will you uphold your oath to the Constitution of the United States?
Of course, I'll uphold my oath to the Constitution of the United States. However, I will abide by any laws that are passed.
Unconstitutional ones?
Please let him answer the question, please.
So that's the question that I dug out of what you said.
If that law violates the Constitution, it is an unjust law and thus no law at all. So it is your duty to stand down and not execute an unlawful order or an unlawful law.
There are a lot of people who want to ask questions. The pause takes up time. Yes, and I'd like the chief to be able to fully answer the question. That was a pretty good example of more of a statement than a question. I think we can do that. Okay.
Okay, but the full answer to that is, like I said, we do uphold the Constitution. We also follow the laws. If the laws that are passed are deemed unconstitutional by a court, then we follow that court. You understand where I'm coming from?
Oh, yes. We understand.
Yes.
We'll go over here on this side.
Hi, my question is to Jim Wallace.
My name is Kevin Rumbach, and I'm from Western Mass. Jim, I have a question for you. Do you know of any studies that were done after the assault weapons ban on the federal level passed, and then sunsetting, as to the effectiveness of the assault weapons ban on crime?
Well, I mean, as far as official studies, there's really no reason to study it, because if you look nationwide on an annual basis, just around 300 people are killed by any kind of rifle at all, never mind an assault rifle. As a matter of fact, the deaths from assault rifles are so low that the FBI actually doesn't even categorize it. It actually, if you look at the crime gun statistics, when they were available to the public, they were many categories, even revolver, semi-automatic pistol, and the categories went all the way through. The one category they never had was assault rifle, because it was virtually never used. And by the way, just so people understand, the crime gun statistics are very much swayed, because any gun that is traced by the ATF is automatically considered a crime gun. In the last reports that were available, 75% of guns traced by the ATF were never used in a crime. They were just simply traced.
I think Representative Linsky wants to
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to say something about that. I agree with Jim on this. I really do. Because assault weapons aren't the biggest part of the problem. Jim's right. Very few crimes and shootings are committed with assault weapons. It's a small part of the problem. The much bigger problem are incidents that occur with handguns. That's what the statistics show. And so I agree with it.
Okay, great. The gentleman in the plaid shirt.
Jim Ladine, I'm a biochemist.
And where are you from, Jim?
I am from Northbridge. off-speed question. Please don't giggle, because I actually want a serious answer. And before I ask the question, I need to say, as a biochemist, the idea that anybody in the Center of Disease Control, all the virologists and bacteriologists and microbiologists there, would be tasked on a gun project is an obscene use of
Can we have?
Thank you.
All right, a question, please.
actually invited
A question.
Yes, would you, this is to Representative Linsky, and it has to do with the symmetry of how legislators live relative to the people they legislate over. And would you submit to disclosing your own mental health history and the history of other legislators? Because the pen is mightier than the sword, and you're actually holding the pen. So would you
We've got the question.
Would you support a bill to require politicians to disclose their mental health history to the electorate before elections?
If they were applying for a gun license afterwards.
No.
How about voters? How about teachers? How about police officers? How about biochemists?
They cannot make laws over us. They cannot make laws over us. You can. You have the pen.
The answer for that, my friend, in all seriousness, we have a system in Massachusetts. We have a system in Massachusetts and the rest of the country called elections. Right. Every 2 years, I put my name on the ballot, and the people of Natick, Sherburne, and Millis decide whether or not they want to elect me or not. And they send me every 2 years. If they don't want to send me in 2014, they won't. Okay?
You want the same mental health history that you want.
But when you disclose yours,
The answer's no.
I'm not trying to make...
Okay, you've asked your question. Over here.
I apologize for holding the flag since I brought it in. I figure I should hold it.
And where are you from, sir?
My name is Timothy Paul Roche. I am from Hudson, Massachusetts. And my question is for Representative Linsky. I had a lot of different questions, and you just sort of brought one to the fore. You said every 2 years you're elected. Being elected does not mean that you can violate the U.S. Constitution. Do you remember the oath of office you took, and have you read the U.S. Constitution?
As a matter of fact, sir, I do, and I have. I take that oath extremely seriously. And I have studied that Constitution as a lawyer for 32 years, and I swore an oath on the day I was sworn into the bar. You're holding it right there. I'm glad you are, sir. But it's not for you and I to determine what the Constitution means. It's up to the Supreme Court of the United States of America.
Okay.
Of course I do.
Sir, please. Okay, let me just say that I would like the questions to be informational in nature and the answers.
I get information.
And these are personal in some cases and emotional. And I think that there's enough facts on either side of the gun issue. If we could just reflect on those and make sure that our questions address something that's already been said by one of the panelists. Okay? Over here, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening. My name is Bob Canning. I live in Natick. I'm a paramedic. I'm an NRA instructor on range safety officer. I'm a proud, basically a lifetime gun owner. My question in the framework of, I heard Mr. Linsky referred to us as, he said we should listen to our rulers. Guess who the ruler is? Anyway, in the framework of that, my question is for Jim Wallace. Jim, could you explain, maybe elaborate a little bit to the crowd here, what the mindset of seemingly anti-constitutional, anti-American by action our legislators do by making it tougher to be a licensed, law-abiding citizen? What have they done to make it harder to be a criminal? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's a real question in there as far as what's going on in the State House, but, you know, you gotta realize is what happens in the State House takes an awful long time. Bad things happen quick, good things happen slow in the State House. And it's just the way the system is designed, unfortunately. But actually, in many cases, we're fortunate that it is that way. Can you imagine if bills could be passed in the State House in a 24-hour period with no hearings and no second readings and no third readings? Exactly. Well, yeah, New York State, but we don't do that here. And luckily, the process for that is slow. And we've actually been able to bridge a lot of gaps in the State House, especially in the last 5 or 6 years. You haven't seen any laws passed here like you have around the country, and it's because of the bridges that we've got and the education that we've done up in the State House. Now, I know you're all angry about what's going on. Certainly I am. I'm Scottish, so, you know, we get the kilts and the blue face paint going, but it's, no, I've been paid big money not to wear the kilt. But you know, we really need to approach this as professional. Everybody here admires and respects the Constitution. The people up in the building, whether you like them or not, have a tough job to do. Some we like better than others, but you still have to respect the fact that they're looking at pieces of 7,000 pieces of legislation in a given year. You know, certain things are very much important to us. They are being hammered by people from the outside to find an answer to Connecticut. And quite frankly, sometimes the worst things that get to the State House are things that there's no answers for. You know, Connecticut, there's no amount of legislation that you could have passed that would have stopped Connecticut shy of making sure that anybody who was ever diagnosed of any kind of mental illness was in prison permanently. So it's very interesting when you go to that fact. But anyway, thanks.
Thank you. I think it's time, because I want some balance here, to ask for a question. Is there anyone standing in line now that would like to provide a dissenting type of question? I see one hand over here.
Hi, I'm Diana Bosberg. I live here in Holliston, and I'm a member of the Democratic Town Committee, so I helped put this together just in the interest of full disclosure. Thank you. And I also have a license to carry pepper spray. So, my question is for Jerry, and I'm really fascinated by the power of the NRA to shape our national discussion and to affect legislation. And I would like to know more about it, like what percentage of the NRA funding comes from gun manufacturers and other members of the gun industry, and also how many members of the NRA board or the higher levels of their power structures are also board members of gun manufacturing companies like Block, Smith & Wesson, Midway, and other companies like that.
Yeah, well, the NRA in the last election cycle, I'm sorry, you can still hear me without this, right? I know you don't. The NRA in the last election cycle spent about $20 million contributing money to elected officials or officials that would have liked to see get elected, or to various issues. It controls the dialogue in Congress, there's no doubt about that, and it is funded by the gun industry. So when we say the NRA, you know, is responsible for these laws, it really isn't. It's the gun industry. Now, the Shooting Sports Council has identified the gun industry income, or the impact, annually in the United States of about $33 billion, with a B, billion dollars. That's a lot of money. They can sell guns to as many people as the NRA pretty much allows through its legislation and through Congress. So the NRA has managed to allow 40% of gun sales in this country to be done without background checks. It's managed to arm criminals. It's managed to arm terrorists. It's managed to arm mentally ill individuals. And now that it's managed to arm all those people, it's trying to convince the rest of Americans to arm themselves against the criminals, terrorists, and mentally ill that they've managed to arm. It's a beautiful business plan It's a wonderful business plan. It should be taught in every business school in this country.
The criminals are in the State House and the White House.
Time out, everybody. We're going back to the questions, all right?
Yeah,
Sir.
I'm sorry, but I gotta, no, you
Please, I already identified this man, and then he can have a turn, all right?
You stacked the deck against him.
Please, I already pointed to him to ask his question. Let him ask his question.
All right.
Would you mind holding up
My
your
name is
question?
John Franceschi, and I'm a resident of Blackstone, Massachusetts. And I have a short series of short questions for Representative Linsky.
Perhaps you can pick one.
Perhaps I can pick a couple.
One.
Representative Linsky, as I understand, you've got some extensive experience as a prosecutor, and you apparently attended law school. For those of us in the audience that may not have that kind of experience, could you explain to the folks here, in your understanding, of the difference between a right and a privilege?
Lots have been written about that, but can we bring it back to?
It's a question.
We live under the Constitution of the United States of America and the Constitution and the Declaration of Rights. We talk about the Massachusetts Constitution because that's called the Declaration of Rights, in case you haven't read it. Okay?
I have a copy in my pocket.
Right, and I'm glad you do, because it's an important document. Look, those are questions that, treatises are written about. I can't give you a 2-second answer or a 10-second answer, okay? Well, I want to bring it to a specific question about laws. It's up to, as I've said this before, our laws, you talked about this before. Okay, we live, if I can finish for a second. The Supreme Court of the United States, the Supreme Court of the United States decides the interpretation of the Constitution. The Supreme Judicial Court of the Massachusetts decides the Massachusetts Constitution interpretation. That's the system we have. I've read every single amendment. I've been a lawyer for 32 years, okay? I know a lot about this.
Since that question
I asked in the beginning of this program for people to be civil.
Since that question was kind of punted on, I
And
didn't get the answer.
I want to be able to have people ask the
Another question.
What's your question?
have it answered without interruption. Can I ask that of you?
No, hey.
We're gonna go to the next question, sir. I need somebody from the other side.
Can we get an answer to the question?
Rebuttal from Mr. Wallace.
Somebody will ask Jim a question. When they do, he can have his time for rebuttal. Ellen, do you have a question? I do. Did you have a question from the other side? Yes.
Okay. Hey, listen, the Democratic Town Committee chose to do this. Everyone on the committee who put this together feels strongly about gun control, okay? But listen, we invited you to our house.
Public's house.
We invited you here to have a conversation. Respectful conversation.
For us.
And you need to.
We paid for this building.
We all did, sweetheart, okay? We all did.
I'm not your sweetheart.
But let's just be cool and respectful of each other. Because then we can have questions.
Okay, let's go on with our questions. Thank you.
Feel a lot of love in this room.
This isn't
scientist. I'm from Westford. If you'll indulge me just 1 second, I'd like to make a statement and then ask a question. The statement is, I'm a gun guy, just full disclosure. I would appreciate it, my fellow gun folks, wouldn't talk over other people, please.
Thank you.
Let them say what they want, that will carry its own. My question is for the police chief. Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, thank you. It's my understanding that police have access to what some folks term assault weapons. Is that correct? AR-15 type rifles, you have access to, normal law enforcement has access to those firearms, is that correct?
We do.
Okay. Do police use them for offensive or for defensive capabilities? I mean, my understanding, just thinking about this, is that police, if they have to, they arrest someone. They don't kick down a door and just start shooting indiscriminately or anything crazy like that. So you have access to these firearms for defensive capabilities, is that correct?
I don't know if I term it offensive or defensive, but term it as protection.
Personal protection, sure, for the officer.
Protection for the public also.
Sure, okay. So then the only other question that I would have is to anyone who would want to pass a law to restrict that to myself, law-abiding citizens, why would you want to reduce my defensive capability?
Government doesn't trust
Thank you. And please, don't talk over people.
Okay, we're gonna get a question from the, dissenting point of view. Beth, behind you.
This is to you, Jim. I understand that in the United States, there's around 350,000 guns stolen every year. And I think we can guess, maybe Chief Moore can confirm this, that very few of these guns come back. So with this happening year after year, it's like there's millions of guns that have been stolen that are in the hands of people who should not have them. My concern is mainly for the children that are dying in the inner city. Do you have any suggestions of how we could get these guns back? How we can bring this genie that's out of the bottle back in so that we don't have these guns in the hands of people that have not been, that are not the owners? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I honestly can't tell you, I don't have the statistics of what guns are stolen, but let's just, say agree with what you said for now. The biggest thing we can do to make sure that people who shouldn't have guns, basically don't have the freedom to access them in the first place. You know, one of the debates I had several years ago with John Rosenthal from Stop Handgun Violence, when he asked me, Jim, can't you at least agree that a level 3 sex offender should have to have a background check before they buy a gun? My question was, let's back up a step. Why are we releasing people from prison who we know are so dangerous we gotta bolt a GPS to them? How about we start dealing with that question first? One of the major things that we actually filed in the last couple of sessions was actually a piece of legislation. We filed it in our big omnibus bill, but we also filed it separately as a piece of legislation, was to create the Criminal Firearms and Trafficking Division of the Massachusetts State Police. And in our legislation, that division would be attached right to the Attorney General's office, and it would be their job to investigate and prosecute any serious gun crime. We're not talking about licensing infractions, you didn't have the right license for the right gun or whatever, but we're talking about aggravated assault with a firearm, we're talking about homicide, we're talking about the serious gun crime. And the idea behind it was if we had one unit of the state police, who's obviously going to need the help of all the local officers as well, but if you have one unit in charge of this stuff,